The Chargers have cast a wide net in their general manager search, and today we're going to be talking about all of their top candidates, and coincidentally, they all have ties to Jim Harbaugh.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together now for 8 seasons, but this is our 6th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. It's also our first year getting to look at potential GM candidates, so thank you guys for making us your first listen today. And to make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Well, we all know who we want to have as our next head coach, but who is going to be the next general manager? So we're going to take a look at all of the guys that the Chargers have had interviews with or have scheduled interviews with to be the next general manager of the Chargers.
And what we just want to know is, who does Jim Harbaugh want to be the general
exactly
manager
right.
the most? And that's why we're going to get into how each one of these guys is connected to Jim Harbaugh, because like I said, they basically all have connections with him. But today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, who helps you find qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. David, there seems to be at least a kind of favorite in the clubhouse, someone the Chargers have already brought in for their potential GM candidate, and it is Ian Cunningham, who I want to talk about first here, the Bears assistant GM. And I think the first thing people think is, why would you ever want anyone from the Bears? Very valid.
Fair.
Right? Because I think when you're looking through this, what you see is a lot of GM candidates that come from winning cultures, and that's always where you want to start, right? But the other thing is, in this scenario, how does that person relate to Jim Harbaugh? But I think when you're just looking at Ian Cunningham specifically, like having worked a long, extended time with the Ravens and the Eagles, that's not a bad place to start your search as far as, successful programs go.
Absolutely not. I mean, I think that's where you start when you're looking at trying to find the next guy who's going to be leading your organization for the most part. Your general manager is the guy that is in control of a lot of different aspects. So you want guys that have a track record of working with organizations that make a lot of good moves and win a lot of football games. And the Eagles and the Ravens most certainly have done a lot of that the last several years.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a guy that is heavily coveted. He was a finalist for the Commanders general manager job before Adam Peters ended up getting that. And that is the thing, is like the timeline for these moves, we just have no idea how quick it can all happen, because Adam Peters went to Washington and never left, right? Like he was gone. The Chargers never even got their chance to interview him. So we don't
new
know
owner
when.
money.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, obviously top 2 pick helps there too, but like, he is also a guy that, according to Albert Breer, was likely to land the Arizona job in 2023 before he ended up pulling his name out of consideration, because he's like, I don't want to be with Arizona. This is a dumpster fire over here, which makes sense. But he is a rising guy. I mean, in 2020, he was named to the Athletics 40 under 40 in the NFL. He spent extensive time with the Ravens and the Eagles and won a Super Bowl as a part of both of those franchises. And I think when you're looking through the list, David, you see a long history of kind of making his way through these organizations and having a lot of stops along the way.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, he started off as a player. He was an all-state, all-area honors offensive lineman and participated in the 2003 U.S. Army All-American game. So, offensive lineman, guy who really understands the trenches, believes in the trenches. Started his NFL career with the Ravens after contacting his college coach, Al Groh, who got in contact with Ozzie Newsome, who's the general manager of the Ravens. And then he was with the Ravens for a very, very long time. They hired him as a personnel assistant. He then would serve in that role until 2012, and of course won a Super Bowl with the Ravens there as well. Then went over to Philadelphia. He had some time there as a scout, and he also was the director of college scouting in 2017, and again Philadelphia won a Super Bowl there as well. So been with a lot of great organizations and has really played a part in helping them win Super Bowl championships, which is ultimately what the Chargers want to do here.
Yeah, and an important thing to think about when you're hearing these guys' resumes too is a lot of times you're going to hear about directors of pro scouting and also directors of college scouting. And the difference between those two things is one of those is finding the up and coming guys in college, and the other guy is looking at guys in the NFL who could come up in potential free agent classes or guys who could potentially get cut. And that's what those guys are tasked in doing. When you're seeing just director of player personnel, those kind of people do both of them. They dabble on both sides. They oversee both sides of it. So that's kind of what you're looking for, right? The scouting part of it's huge. You have to be, and make your team super talented. And this guy obviously helped two different franchises create super, super talented teams. And I think one reason he went away from, the Ravens and eventually the Eagles is because he was sitting next to, legends of the game like Howie Roseman and Ozzie Newsome before he ended up leaving that job and Eric DeCosta took over. But it's easier when you're sitting next to a new guy like Ryan Poles than it is obviously sitting next to legends where those guys are going to get all the credit. And that is the hard thing to kind of decipher when you're talking about these guys is how much of it was him. In this case, he's Ryan Poles' right-hand man and has been very close in a lot of the personnel decisions for these very, very successful teams. And I think the thing I like that you've talked about is just coming up in the trenches and building through the trenches. When you think of teams like the Eagles, teams like the Ravens, you think of super physical teams. And I definitely know you have an appreciation for teams, building through the spine of their team. And the other thing that we saw from him, especially in his time with the Bears, is he came in with Ryan Poles in 2022 and they just started trading like crazy. And after the stint that we just had with Tom Telesco and kind of the lack thereof of trading and being able to go through different avenues to try to, improve your team, that was one of the things that stood out to me the most.
Absolutely 100%. I love building through the middle of the football team, the spine of the football team, the offensive line, the defensive line. They really change the outcomes of the football game. The strength of those two units really impact the game in a lot of different ways. And after seeing a general manager who said that they were going to leave no stone unturned and said they would go out and do anything that they could to upgrade the roster and upgrade their organization, they didn't do that. And
just
so
did the same things over and over again.
And over and expected different results. Well, guess what? You didn't get any different results because you didn't win enough playoff games or football games in general, which is why you ultimately got let go. But I like the fact that this guy is a little bit more of a gunslinger, a little bit more true to the word of, I'm going to go leave no stone unturned. I'm going to go out there and do everything I can. I'm not afraid to make trades. I'm not afraid to go out there and upgrade my roster. Yeah, I'm going to swing and miss occasionally, but I might swing and hit a big home run. And that is also a possibility as well. So I like the fact that he builds through the draft, really is important and thinks it's important to build the spine of the football team, and he's going to go out there and make some trades to go out there and make this team better.
I mean, when were the Chargers last a trenches team, right? You'd have to probably go to the late 2000s.
Yeah.
Since they would be considered that, right? The Jamal Williams days when he was lining up at practice across from Nick Hardwick and Chris Dealman and, all those other
Igor Olshansky.
Yeah. Get a guy named Igor, then we can start talking.
One of the best names ever.
As far as Jim Harbaugh, I think I saw an Igor Olshansky jersey somewhere, but as far as the Jim Harbaugh connections go, he worked with his brother for 9 seasons. So the one thing that we'll talk about a little bit later too is just how connected the Ravens and Michigan were, because both of them like the same type of players. So I think that's why you're seeing, Ian Cunningham, who we're talking about now, Joe Hortiz, who we'll talk about later, who obviously has spent a ton of time with John Harbaugh because they like the same type of players. But when you're trying to bring in someone like Jim Harbaugh, that's what you want. But as far as the trades go, they just landed the number 1 overall pick in the 2024 draft, right? They moved from 1 to 9. That's an aggressive fallback, right? That's a lot of space.
Big trade,
But they got back, as they also, got the 9th overall pick, obviously, but they got another first rounder this year, which is the number 1 overall pick, another second rounder, and a second rounder in 2023, and DJ Moore, right? So it's
and traded for Montez Sweat, too.
Traded for Montez Sweat.
A big one. Gave him a huge contract, too.
And also traded for Chase Claypool, So
that's why I said sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't.
That's who we're talking about. But, 3 trades of that magnitude, right? They're not all going to work out, but I like
Not to mention trading Khalil Mack.
And the other thing, too, traded Khalil Mack to the Chargers and just went through an overhaul, just went through a total kind of roster construction rebuild with the Bears. So has some experience doing that. I think he's definitely one of the top candidates. I think the Chargers would be lucky to have him. Hopefully Jim Harbaugh wants him. But another guy that Jim Harbaugh definitely has been reported to want is Colts assistant GM Ed Dodds. So we're going to talk about why people in the NFL rave about what he's able to do on the scouting front coming up right after this. First, though, I do need to tell you guys about LinkedIn Jobs because at the start of the new year, every small business owner is asking themselves the same question. What's the one thing that I can do to take my business to the next level in 2024? LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success all depends on the team you surround yourself with. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. That's what we're hoping from the Chargers, right? The LinkedIn Jobs, I think they're specifically sponsoring us because they know, hey, if the Chargers just use LinkedIn Jobs, they'll be able to find the right people to start the new year the way we want them to. And LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 8 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. And hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. It's so easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, David, well, I want to get into more of these Chargers potential GM candidates because getting the head coach right is crucially important.
Definitely.
Getting the general manager right is just as important in a lot of ways, right? And especially I think when you're talking about the Chargers, like the last 2 Chargers GMs had the job for at least 9 years. So whoever the Chargers attach themselves to, we could be seeing for a decade. Like I said, We've been covering this team for 8 seasons. We've never got to go through a GM hunt, right? And there's other guys that we kind of wish they would talk to that we won't even get into today because we want to talk about just the guys in the wide net that they've already cast, right? But one of the hottest names in this GM cycle is Ed Dodds. And one of the reasons is because he has a good relationship with Jim Harbaugh. He is the Colts assistant general manager. And another guy, David, that I think when you look at his resume, right, worked with a couple of very successful franchises and has worked, in a lot of different spots along the way.
Yeah, he certainly has. He started as a scout with the Raiders from 2003 to 2006. He was a pro personnel intern for the Raiders before landing his first full-time job as a pro personnel scout with Seattle in 2007. He was with the Seahawks from 2007 to 2016 as an area scout until he was elevated to a national scout in 2017. Then in 2017, he got hired by the Indianapolis Colts to become the vice president of player personnel before he entered his current role as an assistant and general manager under Chris Ballard in 2018.
Yeah, I mean, that is pretty extensive. Obviously, a long time with the Seahawks and one of the guys that's really credited with helping them build the Legion of Boom, right? And multiple Super Bowl appearances during that time. With the Colts, I think you saw even this year, like the roster they've been constructing being Chris Ballard's right-hand man, who a lot of people think is one of the top GMs in the NFL. They were able to put a team together that, with a rookie quarterback and with Gardner Minshew, was able to get within a game of the playoffs, right?
Nobody expected to see that, Daniel. I mean, that was one of the biggest surprises of the 2023 season to me.
Yeah, and I think another guy, built through the trenches, right? They made the move to trade for someone like DeForest Buckner for the middle of their line because they just knew they were soft there, right? I think that's another thing. And this is a guy that's a very no-nonsense guy that's going to tell you always exactly how he feels about guys, prospects, or even guys at the pro level already that they want to bring in. And I think that the big thing here is going to be the Raiders and if they potentially get in the way of this because he did already in 2022 interview for the Raiders GM job where they ended up going with Ziegler and ended up, with Josh McDaniels because Josh McDaniels got to pick his GM over there. But he also is going to interview with them this year, and a lot of people think the reason they would potentially bring him in is because of his connection with Jim Harbaugh. And the connection is he worked with Jim in Oakland with the Raiders. Harbaugh was the quarterback coach when he was the scout there, and they have rumored to have a really good relationship. So, hey, if they're in on Ed Dodds, if Jim Harbaugh thinks that Ed Dodds is the guy, David, that he can work best with at the NFL level, yeah, I'm going to sign off on it right there.
Exactly. That's 100% where I'm at, especially because hopefully Jim Harbaugh is going to be the next coach of the Chargers. And, hopefully he's going to be the coach of the Chargers for a very, very long time. And we don't have to worry about having to cycle through head coach after head coach after head coach. And you finally have the guy that's going to be around for 5, 10, or 15 years, or, a guy who's going to retire as a coach with the Chargers. That's the ultimate dream, right? Having a coach that is going to be here for the long haul. So, you want to have somebody who's familiar with Jim Harbaugh, who's comfortable with him, who understands how he operates, understands his quirkiness, right? That's the word you hear a lot about Jim Harbaugh, that he's a very quirky individual. He's very different. I don't care what kind of person he is. You know what he is? He's a winner. That's what he's done everywhere he's went. And so if you have somebody who is on the same page, the same wavelength as Jim Harbaugh in the upper management and in the big office, then I'm all for it. And if that's Ed Dodds pairing with Jim Harbaugh, then so be it.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I like the most about it too is like his specialty is scouting, right? And at the end of the day, you're only going to be as talented as the roster you're able to put around Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert, right? And This is from Albert Breer. The NFL Road Scouts universally see Dodds as one of the league's most connected and talented evaluators. And this is from ESPN's Matt Miller a couple of years ago. This guy has been near the top of these GM searches for a few seasons. He said, if you ask 10 front office people around the league who the best scout in the NFL is, chances are the name you're going to hear most is Ed Dodds. This is a guy that knows how to evaluate talent. Hopefully can help you hit on picks throughout the draft and not just hit the guys in the first round, right? Because that's going to be such an important part of it. And when you're talking about relationships and Jim Harbaugh, I think you have to bring up Joe Hortiz, who's the Ravens director of player personnel. And David, you showed me an interesting story about just the relationship between him and Jim Harbaugh, because the connections that they had from Michigan and kind of the pipeline of getting his kind of thoughts on some of these guys going from Michigan to potentially Baltimore, or also just, any guys in the Big Ten, I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, it was. It was a very interesting article from ESPN where he basically talked about how he had a connection with Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, and he helped him kind of evaluate some of the players that he saw. He said, Jim helps me out with those guys at Ohio State because he knows them so well playing against them. And he also went on to say it's definitely an asset, as far as the relationship between Jim Harbaugh and, the organization. So that's definitely something that's very, very important. And Joe Hortiz has been with the Ravens for a very, very long time. 26 years with the Ravens. That is a lifetime to be with one franchise.
Super Bowls too,
and,
right?
won some championships, and obviously you're with an organization that has won a lot of football games, that has a calling card for being extremely physical, built within the trenches, and has really been out there and imposed their will on teams year after year after year. And that's definitely one of those teams where you're going to want to mine talent from, whether that's players, coaches, or in this case, general managers.
And I think the very impressive thing, I think if you just look at the Ravens, I think you'd say, hey, who is this director of player personnel? Because it's such a talented roster, right? It's either them or the 49ers, who have the most talented rosters in the NFL. And this is someone that is, has a lot of influence there. This is what the Chargers posted about him. He is one of the members that oversees all aspects of both college and pro scouting, like I talked to you about, with the Ravens, and also serves as the general manager Eric DeCosta's chief personnel evaluator. This is also from Albert Breer, who said Hortiz has long been one of the best college scouts in the league and has worked his way through the Ravens organization the same way that guys like Jets general manager Joe Douglas and Baltimore GM Eric DeCosta did before him, right? So he's following in those same footsteps, has shown a knack for being able to find talent, and is definitely deserving of getting this interview with the Chargers, because those are the kind of guys you're looking for, guys that can build that kind of talent and also come from a place where they've been able to build and replenish and restock that talent for 20 plus years. That is super, super enticing. And the other thing is, who knows how to get players that Jim Harbaugh likes better than someone like this, right? Because Jim Harbaugh and John Harbaugh like a lot of the same type of players. He's been trying to find players for John Harbaugh since 2008. And that's the connection, is he's been sending a pipeline of not just Michigan guys, but also Ohio State guys, a big part of why they drafted someone like J.K. Dobbins, right? Because they know they had the communication between the two of them to cut through the BS and say, hey, you're going to like this guy. He fits in what you like to do. And that seems like someone you'd potentially want to pair Jim Harbaugh with. But as we keep going through this list, you just keep saying Jim Harbaugh. Like, the Chargers definitely are showing their cards as far as this GM search with how much they are all in on Jim Harbaugh and want to find people that can work well with Jim Harbaugh. And I think all of these guys basically check that list, including one of the youngest guys we're going to talk about today. Brandon Brown was kind of a very interesting name that popped up in this GM search with the Giants, obviously a team that didn't do very well this year. But there's a good reason for it, and he's super impressive. And then a total wild card in Jeff King from Chicago. So we're going to talk about those guys coming up right after this. First, I need to tell you guys that the NFL regular season is over, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That means all you have to do, place a $5 bet. Whether you win or lose that bet, you're getting $150 in bonus bets. That's the best way to bet when you can't lose. Say you're playing with house money, except for they're also going to give you like 30 times actually what you're betting. So it doesn't get much better than that. And the app is super easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. You can find the bets in the new Explore tab. You can also make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays. And the great thing, too, is especially throughout the playoffs, they're going to have so many great promotions going on. I've seen so many going on. When you go look at the games this weekend, they will probably have a promotion for either a profit boost token where you can definitely multiply your winnings, or you can get no sweat bets where you're playing with house money. It's so many good things going on at FanDuel, and the NFL playoffs are one of the best times to go bet on football. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. I also want to tell you guys about Jase Medical, because I know we come to sports to escape the crazy realities of real life, but I do want to talk to you about, at least for a minute, about preparing for those real life situations, because that's something that Jase Medical can help with. According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade, and that is scary. I know for me, I can't imagine if someone in my family, I have elderly grandparents and things like that, if they were unable to get something that they needed because of a supply chain issue that kept them from life-saving medication they needed. Thankfully, I don't have to worry about that, but that's about as scary as it gets for me. But with Jase Case, you can get a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, amongst others. This stuff could happen to any of us, so visit jasemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It'll be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular price. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jasemedical.com, use the offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your first order. All right, David, well, I do want to get into these other candidates here, because a lot of these made a lot of sense, when I saw them. It's like, yeah, those teams are good, right? Go get guys from really good teams, from winning cultures, from winning organizations.
Yep.
A few of them surprised me, especially the guys that we're going to talk about right now. But make sure you guys are checking out the first ever live 24/7 streaming sports channel. Locked On Sports Today is going on all the time on YouTube, so make sure you guys go subscribe to that, because it is the only thing of its kind, and you get the expertise of all the local experts, because national experts just can't cover their local teams like Locked On is able to do, and I think that's a big reason why the everydayers listen to this show. So thank you guys again for making us your first listen. But let's talk about Brandon Brown, a general manager candidate from the Giants, which is, again, it's like, okay, with Ian Cunningham, it's like, okay, the Bears, I don't know about that. I don't know if I want someone running the Bears and what that team has been, but context is important. So Brandon Brown's only been with the Giants for a couple of years as Joe Shane's right-hand man. And the more I read about this guy, the more I like him. It definitely seems like he's an up-and-coming guy that has, first of all, just been promoted left and right like crazy, David. I mean, promoted 3 times in 5 years with the Philadelphia Eagles, which is his main claim to fame. But I think when you look at his resume, he's definitely someone that's worth keeping an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, he's 35 years old. So as an executive, that's getting general manager interviews, that's phenomenal. I mean, truly. I mean, you got to be a special individual to be in this position already. But first position was with the Jets in the pro personnel as an intern during training camp in 2012. Then he was a scout at Boston College as a recruiting specialist in 2013, as the assistant of director of player personnel in 2014 before moving back to the NFL in 2015. Then he was a scout for Indianapolis, spent 2 seasons with the Colts, first as a scouting assistant and then as an advanced scout in 2016. Then, as you mentioned, with the Eagles, joining them in 2017, was an assistant director of pro scouting in his first 2 seasons and then promoted to director of pro scouting. He was then promoted once again in 2021 to director of player personnel, and then also that's where he oversaw the Eagles pro scouting department. So, I mean, this guy left, right, and center getting promoted over and over and over again. Oh, and also, by the way, this guy's a lawyer. So,
yeah,
very, very intelligent. Obviously, one of the things I read that, that kind of sets him apart is he feels like he's a great critical thinker, outside of the box thinker, pays very close attention to the details, which obviously are all things that you need to be a successful lawyer and to be successful in life as well. So I like a lot of the things that this guy brings to the table. I mean, I think obviously, working with the Giants is not, really one among them, but hey, last year they made it to the playoffs with Daniel Jones and they won a playoff game. So to be able to assemble that team and be able to put the right players in place to be able to make that happen, to be able to bring that to fruition, that's definitely something that is impressive.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying in his first year with the Giants, he did something that Brandon Staley never did in his, tenure as Chargers head coach, and something that Tom Telesco did one time in 11 season as Chargers general manager. And I think when you're looking at it, I mean, that is, I think, the most impressive part, the quick turnaround in New York, right? Took a 4-13 team to a 9-7-1 team and a playoff win. Ended up, being one of the guys as the deciding factors in bringing in Brian Daboll, who's been pretty good with them. Obviously, not so much this year. Quarterback hurt for most of the season, obviously, and just a bad quarterback. But building a roster that was able to, sustain everything that happened in 2022 and get that team to the playoffs. And according to Albert Breer, as you pointed out to me, has a relationship with Jim Harbaugh. Is part of the Ozzie Newsome program about general managers and being able to help young and up-and-coming general managers. And I think that might be where the connection is, because obviously Ozzie Newsome, the general manager for the Ravens for a long time. But good to know that these guys have a relationship, because it's just another feather in the cap where it's like Jim Harbaugh's talking to the Chargers. It's like, hey, we have a bunch of dudes, who do you want, right?
Exactly.
Which is what makes the last guy we're going to talk about so confusing, because he is definitely the wild card of the group. Jeff King, the co-director of player personnel for the Bears, obviously the lowest title of anyone on this list. But I think the most kind of shocking thing about someone like this, David, obviously with an organization that hasn't been great with the Bears, but also doesn't have any notable ties to Jim Harbaugh that I could find. And I searched. I looked everywhere.
Yeah.
Could not find any paths crossing with either Jim or John Harbaugh.
Yeah, me neither. Me neither when I was looking at Jeff King here. But former NFL tight end. He joined the Bears as a pro scout in 2016. Climbed the ladder within the organization, including promotions to assistant director of pro scouting in 2019 and director of pro scouting in 2021 and co-director of player personnel in 2022, which is his current role as it stands right here. He was retained, through the transition from Ryan Pace to Ryan Poles. It's probably one of the longest shots, I think, in both of our opinions, to be able to be named as the next general manager of the Chargers. Yeah,
I think so. I mean, I also wonder, how much probing they're kind of looking for as far as in Ian
Getting
Cunningham.
Some information, maybe, yeah.
That's part of it too. And
of course,
to his credit, I mean, if you talk to people within the Bears organization, if you look at what people like Ian Cunningham have said about Jeff King, if you look at what someone like Ryan Poles has said about Jeff King, basically Ryan Poles, the new general manager of the Bears, who, is responsible for all the things we talked about with Ian Cunningham and just trying to turn around a franchise that seems cursed and has been really, really bad for a long time.
Yeah.
Is, hey, when I first got here, I took a look at what was around, and he was a guy that stood out. He was a guy that I wanted to pull aside and be like, okay, hey, this is a guy's opinion that I really value. Cut straight through the BS and is one of, the top guys in that organization. An organization that hasn't done very well, obviously. But the thing that's going to hurt him the most is doesn't have any ties with Jim Harbaugh. So, hey, if the Chargers don't go with Jim Harbaugh, maybe he's more in play. But I think at least out of the guys we're talking about today, he would be the lowest one on my list, right? Like, hey, maybe he has more of a chance of JoJo Wooden, right? Somebody inside the Chargers organization that's getting a crack at the GM job. Didn't talk about him today, but that's a long shot. I think that's more reflective about, what did we do wrong? How did things go as sideways as they did? How would you have done things differently? so many things like that, which are very, very important. And if the Chargers can take that information and use it correctly. But the Chargers in this search are getting a lot of very successful guys from successful programs that are shooting up through the ranks. And if they're doing their due diligence on these guys, it can only help them as a franchise, right? Find out what makes these winning programs tick. And even if, the Chargers are only going to get one of these guys, there's so much they can learn from the rest of them. But the one thing we care about the most is who is going to give the Chargers the best chance at landing Jim Harbaugh. Whose name came out of Jim Harbaugh's mouth on Monday when the Chargers interviewed him? Because that is what's probably, being able to have that cohesive relationship with such a big name, big egoed head coach.
Yeah.
It's going to be crucially important. And if they get it right, man,
Magic.
they get it right, look out, because I wouldn't put my money against Jim Harbaugh, especially if he's working with someone he works well with. So that's going to wrap things up for today's show. We'll be here tomorrow, of course, with any of the latest news, but probably also a Chargers mailbag. So get your guys' questions in at LockedOnLAC on Twitter. Call into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924 if you want to get your 30-second Chargers question in. That's a good way of getting on the show. And to make sure you don't miss it, follow or subscribe for free wherever you get your podcast from, and also follow the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel as well. And you can find the show every day on my Twitter at Dan Talk Sports and David Drogemeyer's at Dro Talk SD, as well as on Instagram at Locked On Chargers and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. Tell us who you want the Chargers' new general manager to be, but I think they have some really, really good options. So we will be back with you guys tomorrow because it is your team every day with a Chargers mailbag. So make sure you guys get your questions in. But until then, take it easy and go Bolts.